Hey, what's up? Zach here. And before I start this video, I just want to say I have absolutely zero dog in this fight. I have zero bias about this conversation. My only goal is to get the most accurate and complete information on barefoot and anatomic shoes possible so that I can selfishly make better recommendations to my patients and appear as a better doctor to people that come in my office, right? I just, that's my only bias, right? The only side I take in this argument is the side of my patients, put it that way. That being said, if you read any of my YouTube comment sections, my Instagram feed, you've probably seen a ton of comments and questions regarding barefoot or anatomic shoes. And at least to me, I don't want to say that there's a lot of or misinformation out there, but I feel like there's a lot of incomplete information out there. And I consider myself to be in that category of people that just do not have enough information on it. Number one, because a lot of the literature and a lot of the science on it is not settled. There's a lot of commercial bias in the research of footwear, both in the area of barefoot and anatomic shoes, as well as, more traditional shoes out there. So there is a lot to sort through. And I also feel like a lot of times when people are very vehemently, recommending barefoot anatomic shoes for almost every foot, ankle, lower leg, and biomechanical ailment up the chain, a lot of the times that information and those recommendations don't come from a place of complete sound foundations of anatomy and biomechanics. So what I did was I compiled a list of questions from subscribers, my own patients, as well as just questions that I have had that I've asked myself to try to get, more confident and more competent on this subject. And hopefully these prompts will help you make a more educated decision on whether barefoot or anatomic shoes are right for you. So let's get into it. So the first question I had was just something to clarify. Well, what is a barefoot shoe and what is an anatomic toe box shoe? Because they aren't the same, and I hear a lot of people conflating the two together. So a minimalist or barefoot shoe is a shoe that has no padding underneath of it. It is a shoe that really only has rubber on the bottom to protect your foot, right, from abrasion, and then an upper that conforms to the shape of your foot. The interesting thing is, though, is I've seen barefoot and minimalist shoes have midsole foam in them. They say like there's midsole foam cushioning. So my follow-up question to that is, of what is a barefoot shoe, is how much midsole foam constitutes a minimalist or barefoot shoe versus just a regular shoe? What is the difference? Because if you're buying a barefoot shoe, don't you want it to be barefoot? Now, an anatomic toe box or an anatomic shoe is a shoe that is made in the shape of what either the manufacturers or the designers of the shoe feel is the ideal human foot shape. So that means that not all barefoot shoes are anatomic and not all anatomic shoes are barefoot. You can have shoes that have high stacks of foam with in a big shank with an anatomic toe box. You can also have minimalist or barefoot shoes that don't have, a quote unquote anatomic toe box shape. Now this anatomic toe box shape, you can see on most of these, a lot of room around the lesser toes, right? And the midfoot is maybe a little bit wider. The problem with that is that that's not anatomic to everybody, right? There is a range of normal, in terms of anatomy and biomechanics, but there's also a lot of outliers, right? So for me, a lot of times in anatomic toe box shoes, they don't really fit my foot all that well versus a shoe, take the Puma MB04, which a lot of people will find to be an absolute torture chamber because it doesn't fit their foot very well. This shoe fits my foot like a glove. So the term anatomic type shoe, to me, I don't love. It's the shape of a shoe that people think will allow the most toe expansion, not necessarily what is anatomic or normal for your foot. Another thing about anatomic shoes, I knew these prompts would take me down rabbit holes, but the other thing about anatomic shoes is they're not biomechanic shoes. Your feet, lower legs, upper legs, your whole chain, right, your whole kinetic chain goes through different motions and different biomechanical sequences for different things. Walking versus running versus playing tennis versus playing basketball, volleyball, badminton, whatever. And so this might be the right configuration for certain things, but not for others. So anatomic does not equal biomechanic. Now, this next question is probably the most common one I get in my office from patients, and it is, what is the purpose of barefoot shoes? Now, this one's interesting because depending on who you talk to and depending on the use case, the answer is different. So in running, which to me personally is the best use case of barefoot shoes. In running, a barefoot shoe is meant to get you or encourage you to strike more forefoot, right? And stop striking mid or rear foot. It's also meant to allow your strike to be lighter with less peak pressure, less shock up your leg, and just allow you to disperse more weight naturally through the natural shock absorbers in your feet and legs. And you know, the research on this is actually really good. There is really good anatomic and biomechanical studies of this that do show that wearing barefoot shoes over time does lower the peak pressure with striking, right? And it does get you into more of a forefoot strike, makes your foot stay on the ground for less time, right? It overall encourages a more, I'd say, efficient strike pattern when you're running versus a shoe, let's say like this one, where it's, you know, a little bit more maximalist, where a lot of times you can heel strike in this because there's so much cushion in it, it allows you to roll. Now, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. Honestly, the Triumph 22s are fantastic shoes. I'm not saying anything bad about those. But heel striking, obviously, there's not as much shock absorption when you heel strike when you are running. That doesn't include walking. This is running we're talking about. Yeah, heel striking can induce a lot of shock up your leg and can also, you know, induce a lot of shin splints. The funny thing is in one study I read, people that were novice runners, that really hadn't built up any stamina on their leg muscles or foot muscles, anything like that, and then put them in barefoot shoes, they all started getting shin splints even though they were going up on the balls of their foot because their gait, right? Their gait hadn't been trained, right? They didn't have the skills to use this shoe. So even in the barefoot shoe, they were actually starting to get shin splints as well. But take out the entire shin splint argument, take out all that. There are some people that just anatomically cannot forefoot strike. The best they can do is a more, you know, distal rear foot or proximal midfoot strike. There are some people, for a variety of reasons, which honestly could be its own video, could be its own textbook, but for a variety of reasons cannot physically forefoot strike. And so for those people, really, a barefoot shoe doesn't really have a purpose because it's been shown in barefoot shoes, if you do heel strike, that peak pressure goes up like crazy. And so you can honestly start to get, you know, bone marrow syndrome in your heel, God forbid, a stress fracture in your heel, which are just really, really difficult to treat. There are also other issues with barefoot shoes, which we'll get to in a little bit. But the main thing is there are some people who just cannot be trained to strike forefoot. There are some people that, whether it be neuromuscularly, structurally, things like that, just can't do it. So for a lot of those people, that opts you out right there. That's why, you know, in barefoot shoes, if you're trying to go to them and you are someone that you know, really wants to make the commitment, get a running coach. Number one, if you're trying to go into this type of shoe, it'll make that transition so much easier. But number two, a good one will find out if, hey, you just can't use them. Now, some other people will say, just in general, a barefoot shoe, or I guess we could say an anatomic toe box shoe as well, will allow your foot to act its most natural, do its own thing, right? What it was evolved to do. I keep hearing that word, what it's evolved to do, what it's meant to do. And honestly, I do buy that argument. And as someone who has studied the anatomy of the human foot extensively and has taught it, I was an anatomy professor as well, I buy that argument. The problem is I buy that argument that the human foot has evolved to walk on sand, soft earth, dirt, grass, tundra, more changing type conditions. It didn't evolve to walk and run on asphalt, cement, concrete, and hardwood of a basketball floor. The human foot has not evolved to that yet. And I remember vividly watching a video podcast of a really well-renowned anatomist, and he said, when you're looking at the form of the human body, or really take any animal or living thing, you're not looking at what it's evolved to now, because we're still evolving, right? You're looking at it as almost a time capsule, right? So when you're looking at the human foot, you're not looking at what it was evolved to do now. You're looking at what it has evolved to do before. And so with the human foot, yes, if you walk on sand, just go walk on any sand, right? Especially damp sand, you'll see that your arch makes a contour in that sand. It's the exact same contour that an orthotic is made from. And that's why orthotics are made like that. Not saying that orthotics are the be-all end-all to everything either, but the foam in a shoe is meant to more represent those changing conditions. Now, if you tell me that to be a better hunter or a stalker or something, right? Like take like the Outdoor Boys, right? If you watch them on YouTube, if you don't, you should. He's crazy in the best way. But anyway, if you're trying to hunt ptarmigan in the tundra of Alaska and you're trying to get quieter and quicker, then I would say, yeah, the best thing you could do is to get in a barefoot shoe because that'll make you lighter on your feet to hunt and stalk that type of prey. But if you're trying to run a 5K, a 10K, or build up to a marathon, an ultra marathon, right? Our bodies just haven't had enough time to adapt to these conditions yet. It's going to take a lot longer. And that's what a more mainstream or traditional shoe aims to do. Does it always get it right? No. And are there a lot of different, opinions on the best types of foam, shank setups, shapes of those shoes? Yeah, there's a whole debate in the more traditional shoe world of what are the best foams and setups for that too. And the interesting thing is if you read some literature, there are some people that think that maximalist shoes are the true barefoot type shoes because they are most simulating those types of surfaces. Now, I also don't buy that argument really either as a panacea or as an overall argument because to me, the human foot is designed to adapt, right? It's designed to go from sand to dirt to tundra to like somewhat rocky type surfaces and back and forth, right? Go through the woods. That's what the human foot is meant to do. It's not meant to just be on one soft surface all the time, one hard surface, right, or one in the middle. It is meant to adapt. So it's that adaptability on soft earth or on natural earth that I think that's the sweet spot. And how do we get that in a shoe? How do we recreate that adaptability while protecting the foot? I think that's where footwear science should be going, right? And I think that's the most exciting part of footwear science. All right, so next question. Is there a performance advantage to barefoot shoes when running or playing court sports like basketball, tennis, or pickleball? To me, in the short term, no, it's actually the exact opposite. It's actually a performance disadvantage. Let me show you why. We'll take running, for example. In a traditional running shoe, or I should say, not even a running shoe, during push-off, right, the push-off phase of gait, when you're propulsing forward, your metatarsal heads stack and your foot needs to be as efficient as possible, right, to get the most force transmitted through your foot, all the way down your kinetic chain through your foot into the ground, right, to create those ground reactive forces. The higher the ground reactive force, and the more you propulse forward. That's why you see these super shoes have these giant carbon fiber plates in them, all this really thermoplastic, very elastic foam, because it's trying to take all that energy you're putting into it and push you forward more efficiently. If you're splaying your toes, and your metatarsals for that matter, the push-off force and the efficiency goes way down because you're spreading it out amongst a larger surface area. That's why you see a lot of running shoes, especially super shoes, be more pointed, have less room in the metatarsal area, especially not even toe box. I mean, toe box, sure, because it's the last thing that comes up off the ground, but it's more the metatarsal areas to allow those metatarsal heads to stack together and then push off, ending with your big toe. So if you're splaying, actually, it's the opposite. Same with basketball, right? You're trying to get up off the ground. You're trying to jump up for a dunk or a rebound more efficiently, right? Say you're trying to get that last minute rebound and it's you versus somebody else. Don't you want that shoe to be as efficient as possible pushing off? That's why you see a lot of people that wear barefoot shoes end up getting crazy blisters because they're splaying and they end up pronating instead of supinating when they go to jump because their feet just can't, help them up off the ground. Then that also proves the point that over the long run, yes, barefoot shoes 100% without question improve your athletic performance because the muscles that govern the foot, right, the intrinsic muscle, I shouldn't say that govern the foot, but the intrinsic muscles of the foot, the ones that originate and insert, right, the ones that have both attachments in the foot, are some of the hardest to train. A barefoot shoe does the best job of training those muscles. So training in a barefoot shoe to pump up these muscles, have more stamina, right? Just more stamina for jumping, right? There's a difference between having stamina to be able to run, an ultra marathon or a 50K or something versus having the stamina to jump up off the ground 1,000 times. So to me, it's more the training aspect to help you train for those more specific movements, those more specific biomechanical sequences of, let's say, a tennis serve, a tennis slide, a 5K, a 10K, because they're all different techniques. But the one consistent thing there is if you train the muscles of your foot to get more resilient, to have more in the way of energy reserves, you're going to be better when you actually get into an actual game, match, marathon, whatever situation. The one thing I don't see a huge performance advantage in, whether it be in the short term or long term, are anatomic toe box type shoes. I can see it with trail running, to be honest, because of the adaptability. I think yeah, for sure there. I think that's the number one use case of them. In terms of court sports, basically to me, they just make you less efficient and can end up straining muscles or things like that. I think if it's an anatomic shoe that is combined with a barefoot or minimalist component, then I think that the training aspect of it is phenomenal. But just anatomic toe box for anatomic toe box sake, in terms of court sports, I don't see it. Basketball, tennis, pickleball, badminton, volleyball, really anything, to be honest. The toe splaying and things like that, I just don't see as an advantage whatsoever. I think being able to more efficiently stack your metatarsal heads and make your foot as energy efficient as possible is really the way to go. Now, like I said, if you want to train barefoot, it should be a barefoot shoe with an anatomic toe box because, like I said, then you can get the most training possible. You can train the most intrinsic muscles possible. In terms of just an anatomic shoe, I think for walking, for comfort, great, sure, absolutely. For trail running, yeah, I think it's absolutely fantastic. I think these have an undeniable place. In terms of court sports, though, to me, anybody that I've ever seen try to use anatomic toe box shoes for court sports basically ends up straining their flexor hallucis longus, so their adductor or abductor hallucis, or that they end up just, causing strain, shin splints, things like that. They end up getting stress fractures. Unless you are a very well-trained athlete like knees over toes guy, who's just a specimen of a human as it is, those type of people, yeah, you can train yourself up to use them. But for the everyday average person or just someone who's trying to be the most efficient possible. But with that being said, I do agree that trying to cram your feet and toes into a shoe is not a good idea. So no, I definitely think you should not be in shoes that are cramming your foot, that they're uncomfortable, right? Some people have to look at rock climbers, look at how tight they get their shoes to the point where they're taking them off. Every time they're not on a rock, they take them off because they're so uncomfortable. But they need that glove-like fit on them. So I'd love to see long-term studies on rock climbers and what their foot looked like before they started versus after. I think that would be fascinating. But in terms of, do shoes that we're wearing nowadays cause bunions? Do they cause hammer toes? I'm sure in some people with very flexible feet that wear shoes that are incredibly too tight and crammed, yes, it can. Another argument I've heard more than most is that modern shoes are the cause of pretty much all foot ailments, deformities, bunions, tailor's bunions, flat foot, things like that. That just simply does not bear out in the literature. There's ample research, there's ample studies that show that before people were wearing quote unquote modern shoes, that people had these deformities, bunions, tailor's bunions, hammer toes, flat feet, high arch feet. That really hasn't changed because a lot of these deformities, like I said, they're hereditary. Your feet can be a family tree. If your mom, dad, grandma, and grandpa had a bunion, chances are you're going to get one. And so, like I said, yes, I can get it that, I can buy the argument that if you put a child who still has a very flexible foot in a shoe, 2-3 times too small for them, it's super pointed, then yeah, maybe you'd start to get like a pincer foot or a pointed foot. But saying that modern shoes are the cause of every foot deformity we see just simply isn't true, because we just simply have the data, we have the evidence that this just isn't true, that people are walking around with these things well before modern shoes. Now, I will concede that flat foot is more prevalent in Western society because as a whole, we are just heavier, myself included. Anecdotally though, look at me, I was in much better shape in college, right? And my feet were in quote unquote much better shape in college. I still have the same size arch as I did when I started podiatry school as I do now. My arch has not dropped 1 millimeter, neither has my belly. So to say that all flat feet or all bunions are caused by, heavier habitus or a heavier body also is not true. Yes, it can lead to a higher incidence of it, but remember, never and always are very big words. So no, modern shoes are not responsible for every single bunion and hammer toe. Are they responsible for a few of them? I'm sure there are people that are wearing shoes too small for them, or their feet are too wide wearing pointed shoes. But like I said, to say that it's responsible for all of it just simply isn't true. And honestly, sometimes in barefoot shoes, because there can be so much room in the toe box, let's say you don't have the right foot shape, you could have more motion in this toe box, which creates more rubbing, which actually creates a bigger scenario that you would get blisters, that you would get corns and calluses, bleeding toes, things like that. So remember, it's matching the shoe to your foot, not your foot to the shoe. So next question, can barefoot shoes stop injuries? Because I've read a lot of people say, I go to barefoot shoes and all my foot pain has gone away. The answer is unequivocally yes. Barefoot shoes can reduce the rate of injuries. Certain foot problems, certain foot ailments. If you're someone that just has lax ligaments, right, and you have, a hypermobile flat foot, wearing barefoot shoes is not going to stop that. It might help to build up the muscles of your foot in a controlled environment. But like I said, if your ligaments are just not able to handle that, if you have loose or lax ligaments, honestly, you may end up straining more than you actually build up the muscles in your foot. So it actually might be a double-edged sword, or just like a 6 of one, half dozen of the other. Some things like, weak leg muscles, weak foot muscles, fatigue, things like that, stress fractures, yes, barefoot shoes can end up helping. Barefoot shoes can also end up causing stress fractures, right? But unequivocally, yes, there are certain ailments that barefoot shoes can and do treat over the long term, but they can also cause injuries. That's another question. Do barefoot shoes cause injuries? Unequivocally, yes. Stress fractures are the number one thing. Number two, really bad debilitating blisters and skin conditions is a big one. Number three, turf toe as well as tennis toe, runner's toe, which tennis toe, runner's toe is bloody toenails. Turf toe is issues in the actual joint. All of those things barefoot shoes can cause, because a lot of times you have more play in the shoe. Fatigue, things like plantar fasciitis, stress fractures of your heel bone, people that can't heel strike, that's another big one. And like I said, a lot of times you can actually end up getting Achilles tendonitis and Achilles strains for, once again, people that have hypermobility in their feet that cannot control a barefoot shoe, so they need a shank in their shoe. So remember, the plantar fascia and your Achilles tendon, kind of the same structure. Your heel bone is kind of the same thing as your kneecap, right, as your patella. The Achilles tendon wraps around your heel bone, right, and becomes your plantar fascia. And so if your plantar fascia, and more importantly, the ligaments in your foot, can't hold up the columns of your foot, that strain goes up into the Achilles, can actually cause Achilles tendonitis. So there's a lot of things, there's a lot of issues that barefoot shoes can cause. There's also a lot it can treat. To me, the dividing line between it are people that use barefoot shoes sensibly versus those people that just go straight into barefoot shoes. That's all I'm wearing. I was told that that's the key to everything, and then that's where you get it. So the next question would be, do barefoot or anatomic toe box shoes cure bunions? In 99.9% of cases, absolutely not, right? If that were the case, the world of foot and ankle surgery would be so much easier. We would have no use for saws. We have no use for screws and plates. Surgery would be so much easier and the results would be so much more predictable, but that's just not the world we live in. Most bunions are a structural deformity of this bone right here, your first metatarsal and the cuneiform. And what it is this joint is out of alignment, right? It's just twisted this way. And there's also a little bit of a component of rotation. And so that's what pushes your big toe out of alignment, right? Like this. Unless you have an incredibly flexible foot, typically, to get this bone to shift back over to actually be able to line the big toe again, you have to break apart this joint and fuse it into place, or you have to completely realign the first metatarsal bone, one way or the other. If it were as easy as wearing a barefoot or anatomic shoe to just shift it over time, that would mean that just loosening up some ligaments, right, or lengthening a tendon here or there would also accomplish the same goal acutely. And we know from paper after paper after paper in the surgical literature, that just doesn't work. Right? The deformities come back. Just on the other side of the coin, there are other people that say that their orthotic will cure your bunion, will cure your tailor's bunion. And that's, I think, equally nonsense. Yes, an orthotic can potentially slow down the progression of a bunion, maybe. There's also some evidence that maybe training up certain muscles of your foot can help halt the progression of some bunions, flexible bunion deformity. And maybe some hammer toes. A lot of it's just having one muscle that's too short for the other, having imbalances that have been caused from birth, right? They're just hereditary. I don't doubt that there are some people that their feet have looked better after spacing their toes out, maybe because like the big toe is shifting over, but it is also gonna make your foot kind of artificially wide, because I guess if you have a bunion, right, and your first metatarsal head is kicked out like this, and then you're used to having a bunion like this, and now you're stretching it and you have some stretch, that's what your foot's gonna look like underneath of your skin, right? That's what it'll look like under x-ray. And to me, that's abnormal. So over the years, that's going to cause some other issues up the chain. So the next question would be, should you go barefoot as much as possible, right? There are some people who say like, hey, be barefoot as much as you can. I think for some people, it's probably comfortable, and it's probably, yeah, if you're trying to train, right, you're trying to train your feet. I don't know about as much as possible, but I definitely think there should be a dose of it in there. There are some people that just cannot walk barefoot. There are some people that have structural deformities or issues with their feet that they can't do it. That is a conversation for you and your doctor. That is not, that's one of those things where that is not an overall type thing. I know there are a lot of people that have the foam rolls of their feet that try to get them to stretch more. That can really cause plantar fasciitis sometimes. In some people it doesn't. Some people, they're limber enough and they've built up over a longer period of time to do that. But yeah, it works great. It stretches their feet. So like I said, that is person dependent, that is athlete dependent, and that is something that you have to decide with your doctor, like I said, under a more guided circumstance, not necessarily just everybody should do it. But honestly, to try to bring this plane in for a landing, I think the biggest question is should everybody or every athlete wear barefoot shoes? My answer is yes. If you are trying to become a higher level athlete, if you are trying to get yourself to that next level. I don't mean you should wear them all the time, but I do think that they should be part of your training regimen. I know when I did it a little while ago just to learn, I was playing tennis in barefoot shoes, and I can't tell you how much better my footwork got. I couldn't wear them all the time, right? Just because I don't have the anatomy and biomechanics for it. But training in them for a little bit at a time to train your proprioceptors, to train that neuromuscular feedback, it's invaluable. Also, training the muscles in your foot to become more resilient. Does that get you across the finish line a little bit quicker? Does that keep you fresh in the fifth set of a match? Does that allow you to get that rebound over somebody else? Unequivocally, yes. I think that if you're not training barefoot, or you're at least not giving it an attempt, right? Because some people just can't. But if you're at least not trying, then you're not doing everything you can to get better, to improve your physiology and improve your biomechanics. So I know that it seems like I've been a little bit harsh on barefoot and anatomic shoes, and that's just because I want to dispel, at least to me, some myths about them and to create a more realistic expectation for people for anatomic and barefoot shoes. But my opinion is unequivocally yes. There is a genuine place for barefoot shoes out there, and to me, it's almost an unfair advantage to the people that take advantage of it. I do think there's a much bigger place for barefoot style shoes versus just anatomic toe box shoes. I think that you're using them for training, right? You're using them to get better. So the barefoot component to it, the minimalist wear is what's doing it, right? Is training those muscles. And the anatomic toe box, yes, it is making you become more stable, and it's allowing you to feel the ground better. I think that's what the anatomic toe box does. It allows you to feel the ground better. If you've got a giant stack of foam underneath of you, well then it's almost just, it's kind of negating the best parts of it. So like I said, for comfort, an anatomic toe box shoe, yeah, for sure. For walking, absolutely, it's great. But for training, I think it's definitely barefoot. In terms of walking, I don't necessarily think it matters, because in walking, right, you're heel to toeing, right? You're not forefoot striking. Normal locomotion for walking is a heel strike. So to me, an anatomic shoe that has a normal foam stack, to me, for walking, if you want that, I think is better. I don't necessarily love barefoot shoes for just normal walking. I think it's more of a training aid or more of a running type thing. If you want to run in barefoot shoes and you've trained enough, I think that's great. So that's my opinion. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. Questions you may have for a potential future video. I know this was a long one. I know I went off on a lot of tangents. I am losing my voice after all this, just because there's so many questions. This is such a big topic. So I hope you've learned something. I hope that if you do make a comment on this video, that it's not just a snap judgment about how I'm a shill for the shoe industry, because I'm not. I really don't care what shoe companies make. I'll review whatever that comes out, right? I just, to me, I want to see where this goes, and I'm really excited to see where all this goes, because I think we're close to really unlocking some new things in the footwear industry both with Anatomic toe box shoes, barefoot shoes, as well as traditional shoes. I think it's just kind of piecing them all together. So love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. And if you want to see what I'm talking about with the LeBron James foot, actually this is an older video, but I think it still holds true and it kind of goes more into the deep dive of bunions and do shoes cause bunions. Make sure you click into this video up above and subscribe down below. Respect your elbow and foam. I'll see you somewhere in the sneakerverse.